What are some ridiculous history facts? Abraham Lincoln's son, Robert Todd Lincoln, was present at 3 different presidential assassinations. After McKinley, he decided not to accept any more invitations. Also, Robert Lincoln's life was saved by John Wilkes Booth's brother, Edwin, a famous actor, who pulled him out from a train that was about to drag him under its wheels. 101 years ago, a massive tank of molasses burst open in Boston, causing a sticky wave that killed 21 people and injured well over 100. The Great Molasses Flood spread at about 35 miles per hour. In 1895, the entire state of Ohio had only 2 cars. Both cars managed to still smash into each other. The first known political cartoon is Egyptian, and shows Hatshepsut, the only woman pharaoh, pegging her lover and chief architect Senmut. There's a children's book called The Pharaoh's Secret that kinda gets into this. Interesting book. Former U.S. President Andrew Jackson was approached by a man who pulled a gun on him. Smaller history fact: this was the first assassination attempt on a U.S. president. The man pulled the trigger and the cap went off, but the gunpowder failed to light. The man pulled a second gun and fired, but the gunpowder again failed to light. The assassin tried to get away, but not before Andrew Jackson got him and beat the shit out of him with a cane. Karl Marx's great-great-grandson has a YouTube video of him doing parkour, called !Marx. I watched it and it's not actually bad or anything. Just funny considering his lineage. The entire country of Malta was awarded the George Cross for its efforts in World War II. It's still on their flag. Interestingly enough, it sounds like the conditions for the awarding of the cross are kind of similar to how the Knights Hospitalier operated back in the Sword and Shield days. If you're unfamiliar, they were more or less a precursor to the Red Cross and the first real paramedics. Potatoes were not very popular as a food in France. Like they were seen as fit only for animals. Not only that, but they were considered generally not digestible by humans. So a pharmacist named Parmentier knew they were good food and wanted to popularize them among the working class. So he got a 2-acre farm to grow potatoes and placed armed guards around it at all times. People assumed armed guards meant something very valuable was growing there, so they began to steal the potatoes. That's how potatoes became popular in France's working class. He also told his guards to accept bribes and to not actually catch anyone. During the Cold War, there was an idea to drop XL condoms labeled medium onto the Soviets to make them think we were anatomically superior and be more afraid of fighting us. Easily my favorite part of American history. Whoops, I dropped my monster condom for my magnum dong. General Omar Bradley was stopped by MP during the Battle of the Bulge in WW2 due to them thinking he was a Nazi infiltrator. The irony was that he was stopped because he correctly identified the capital of Illinois as Springfield when the officer thought it was Chicago. I've met plenty of people who thought Chicago was the capital of Illinois just because it's our most populated city. Montenegro technically was in war with Japan for 101 years and they signed a peace treaty in 2006. Montenegro was aligned with Russia in Russo-Japanese War and they declared war on Japan, but they forgot to peace. Not the only time this happened in history. The Scilly Islands were at war with the Netherlands for quite a while, if I recall correctly. Edit. Wikipedia link. Some people dispute it, but here's a wiki link. https://en.m.wikipedia.org/wiki/335 years %27 war. Further edit. List of similar wars. https://en.m.wikipedia.org/wiki/list of was extended by diplomatis regularity. Pepsi once had the 6th largest military in the world after the price of Russian vodka couldn't cover the deal for Pepsi products. So they traded 17 submarines, a frigate, a cruiser, and a destroyer for a trade deal. Fun fact, the president of PepsiCo at the time told the National Security Advisor, "We are disarming the USSR faster than you are." Gorbachev appeared in a Pizza Hut commercial. Hitler, Stalin, Trotsky, Freud, and Tito were all living in the same area of Vienna in 1913. 1904 Olympic marathon in St. Louis. The #1 finisher drove most of the race. He started the race, got tired and heat exhausted and wanted to drop out. He got in a car to DQ himself and head back to the stadium, but along the way realized he was near the finish line and got out to claim the glory. The number 2 finisher was carried across the finish line by his trainers. On a bogus pseudoscience theory, the trainers had been giving him a mixture of brandy, egg whites, and rat poison instead of water. When it came out that the number 1 finisher had driven most of the course, this guy was given the gold despite the help from his trainers to finish. For some reason, the number 3 finisher was just a regular guy who did nothing unusual. In this case, ordinary was extraordinary. The number 4 finisher was a Cuban mailman, who had raised the money to attend the Olympics by running around his entire country and asking for donations. When he landed in New Orleans, he lost all the money gambling. He managed to scrounge enough to get to St. Louis and attend the Olympics. However, he had no money for athletic gear, so he ran in dress shoes and pants hacked off at the knee by a fellow racer who happened to have a knife. He probably would have come in first had it not been for the hour-long nap he took on the side of the road after eating rotten apples he found at an orchard near the course. The number 9 and number 12 finishers were from South Africa, and ran barefoot. South Africa didn't actually send a delegation, these were students who just happened to be in town and thought it sounded fun. Number 9 was chased a mile off course by angry dogs. Half the participants had never raced competitively before. Some died. St. Louis only had 1 water stop on the entire run. This, coupled with the dusty road, and exacerbated by the cars kicking up dust, lead to several fatalities. The Russian delegation arrived a week late because they were still using the Julian calendar until 1918, while effectively the rest of the world had switched to the Gregorian calendar. Credit to you, Draken_Pyrothyon, for this synopsis, which I have shamelessly stolen and tweaked just a little for clarity and brevity. This was the most early 1900s thing I've ever read in my entire life. In 1967, Australian Prime Minister Harold Holt disappeared while swimming in the ocean. He was presumed drowned, so naturally that year we named a swim centre after him in Memoriam. Edit. Added his name, which I meant to do when I wrote the post, but obviously my brain snapped midway through the sentence and I forgot it. American military members were also killed during the nuclear bombings of Japan. When American High Command was informed of their presence, their response was something like, "Targets remain unchanged." In 1908, there was a car race around the world that started in NYC. The route would start in NYC to San Francisco to Valdez, Alaska, across the Bering Strait, through Russia and Europe, with the finish line in Paris. Cars were relatively new and road infrastructure was limited to only metropolitan areas, and even then, a lot of it was cobbled stone. But what you might have thought, is how in the world can a car get across the Pacific? Duh, they would drive across the Bering Strait during the winter when it froze into an ice bridge. Silly. The race began in February 1908 and immediately ran into challenges. To list a few: cars breaking down multiple times, lack of usable roads, car-hating people giving wrong directions, and oh yeah, snow. The first team reached San Francisco in 41 days. But quickly realized that the proposed route from San Francisco to Alaska did not exist. So the organizers allowed teams to ship their cars to Valdez, Alaska, then continue on the ice bridge. Once in Valdez, the teams found out that there is in fact no ice bridge across the Bering Strait anymore because it melted, approximately 20,000 years ago. Small oversight. Organizers then allowed teams to ship their cars across the Pacific to Japan, then Russia to carry on. Despite all unpredictable and hilariously predictable odds, the winning team arrived in Paris 169 days later. Highly recommend to listen about it from the Dollop podcast. There's more nonsense that happens that I couldn't fit in, remember. Where's the Bering Strait ice bridge? I swear it was here yesterday. Once FDR died, Truman didn't know about the Manhattan Project, but when he found out, he subtly tried to tell Stalin they were working on something big. Stalin was like, "Yeah dude, I knew before you did." Since he had so many spies in America. Henry Cavendish. The man who was vital in the discovery of gases and discovered hydrogen. He inherited a ton of money from his uncle, and built a special castle, I think. He was incredibly introverted, so it was designed so that he never had to meet or see any of his servants. He communicated with them through notes only. He did, however, appreciate other scientists coming to visit and talk. His works mostly came after his death, of course, but I found this guy interesting. The capture of the Dutch fleet at Den Helder on the night of 23 January 1795 presents a rare occurrence of a naval battle between warships and cavalry, in which a French Revolutionary Hussar regiment captured a Dutch Republican fleet frozen at anchor between the 3 kilometers (1.9 miles) stretch of sea that separates the mainland port of Den Helder and the island of Texel. After a charge across the frozen Zuiderzee, the French cavalry captured 14 Dutch ships and 850 guns. A capture of ships by horsemen is an extremely rare feat in military history. https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/capture of the Dutch fleet at Den_Helder. Sounds like something that would happen in a civilization game. Imagine being on a boat and some dickheads on horses pull up and demand you to surrender. During the Viking era, there was a leader named Sigurd. He allied with a Viking warlord named Thorstein. He wanted to conquer more land and expand his territory. He had already been very successful in doing so. This was until he feuded with another leader called Maul Bucktoothed or Maul Tusk, as his front 2 teeth were abnormally large and bucktoothed. They decided to settle their matters on the battlefield and both agreed on bringing 40 men each for the battle. However, Sigurd ignored the terms and brought 80 men. Bucktoothed had realized he had been betrayed but did not give up. They killed a number of Sigurd's men, but alas, they were overpowered and were all killed. Here's the catch: after the battle, Sigurd ordered his men to behead all the enemies and tie them to their saddles as trophies. However, as Sigurd rode home in victory, the severed head of Bucktooth pierced his leg, which led to an infection, killing him soon after. When Alexander the Great was a child, he was reprimanded by a teacher for wastefully throwing 2 whole fistfuls of rare incense into a sacrificial fire. When he was an adult and captured Gaza, which happened to be the prime agricultural source of the incense he wasted, he sent home 18 tons of it home to the same teacher as a gift. In ancient Egypt, servants were smeared with honey to attract flies away from the pharaoh. That's so dumb, why not just put the honey on a statue or something? There used to be bread stamps burned into a cooked loaf of bread, to avoid bread fraud, as the government supplied the wheat flour, but some bakers tried to use sawdust and other ingredients in the bread to make the wheat last longer. The bread stamps were baker-specific, so they could track down where any tainted bread came from. If they were caught, they had to move to another town to make bread, or wait 3 years to continue making bread if I remember correctly. Bread laws were huge throughout most of history. Nowadays, the idea of the government so strictly regulating an industry that they are forced to sell at a certain price seems odd, but in a time when food shortages were always a danger and food reserves were slim, bread becomes a very important commodity. It's how the Roman emperors kept Rome quiet despite the fact it was such an absurdly huge city, literally bread and circuses. Free bread, free water, and free entertainment. Colombia has a period in history literally called the dumb homeland period because of how incredibly dumb politicians acted at the time. How long ago? Herostratus is the guy who burned down the Temple of Artemis. The only reason he did it was to have his name written down in history. A law was also passed that made it illegal to write down his name for just that reason. Obviously, it is not enforced in modern times. Before Abraham Lincoln became a politician, he was a champion wrestler. With more than 300 bouts under his belt, Lincoln only lost 1 match in his career and was inducted into the National Wrestling Hall of Fame in 1992. He also jumped out of a window in order to prevent a quorum. At one time there was not only a pope and an anti-pope but also a counter-anti-pope. If a pope and an antipope meet, do they annihilate each other? Thomas Jefferson and John Adams died on the same day. July 4, 1826. The 50th anniversary of them both signing the Declaration of Independence. Adams's last words were, "Thomas Jefferson survives. He was wrong by about 5 hours." The first bomb dropped on Berlin by the British during WW2 claimed no human casualties. But it did kill an elephant. Never forget. There were 9 elephanter in Berlin Zoo at the start of WW2. At the end of the war, there was only 1 left. Its name was Siam. Edit. Didn't expect this to blow up. I've decided not to amend my typo you, Pantelwolf. Edit 2. The pun was intentional smiley face. Loved reading your replies. The Battle of Bull Run, during the American Civil War, was called the Picnic Battle because so many civilians from Washington went on picnics on the sidelines and watched. But once the battle actually started, and the Union started to get its ass kicked, they all ran away, running over injured soldiers and dead bodies and generally disrupting the battle. This was actually a relatively common thing during the Civil War. I know it happened at Gettysburg too. Fucking tourist. It also happened at the Battle of Watling Street in the year 61. The Iceni were so confident they would defeat the Romans, they gathered round in their wagons to watch. When they were routed and had to fall back, the wagons blocked their path, and that's how Boudicca was defeated. Claudius Drusus died in AD 20 from asphyxiation when he tossed a pear in the air and caught it in his mouth. The pear tree was put on trial, found guilty of murder, and destroyed. 2 important questions. 1. How large was this man's throat? 2. How small was this pear? When the Romans laid siege to Thermos Cara, a real place weirdly enough, they attempted to tunnel into the city. The Thermoscarans released bears into the tunnels. Thus Tunnel Bear was invented. Thermos Cara brew ain't that Wonder Woman's hometown.